My name is Christian Ashley, a seminary student and servant of God, and you are listening to the Let Nothing Move You podcast, a proud Anazal Ministries podcast. Welcome back to the Let Nothing Move You podcast. I'm your host, Christian Ashley, as today we are going to finish the book of Genesis. Going through chapter 49 through 50, it's been a heck of a journey. We've gone through 3 whole books of the Bible, 3 not so short books of the Bible in over a year. And I'm very happy with the progress that we've made. I'm very happy with the engagement I've gotten, that you guys are enjoying what's being done. So please continue to send, your suggestions in about, things that could be better, what you want me to do, what you want me to focus on more. I do really appreciate it. It's nice to have that engagement on your side of things, as small as an audience as I do have. And I joke about it being very small, but it's true that I have, for what I do have here, a very dedicated group of listeners. So I'm very grateful to all of you that you continue to hang out with me on this. So next bit of business at the beginning, I will be back on my seminary life again. It should be the week of Memorial Day. Earlier last year, Brandon and I did a review of the movie 300 as he was doing his Greek series. Now for his summer, just enjoying things, school's out kind of session, we're reviewing 300 Rise of an Empire, which is a far worse movie. And we spent about 50 some minutes just meandering through the plot of the movie and then going on several different rabbit trails, some of which are kind of on topic too. We even talk about a possible movie about the Maccabees, which I would really love if that happened. So there's that. Be looking forward to that. Next week will be Exodus 1 and 2. Looking forward to getting in there. And I should know better, but I'm going to say it anyways. I should have 2 guests on the week after that for Exodus 3 and 4. I should have Pastor Will Rose of Holy Trinity Lutheran Church up in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, a good friend of mine I work with systematic ecology with. And I should have Brandon Knight as well, he of my seminary life. So the 3 of us together, I'm sure that'll be a really fun time. I'm looking forward to it. There may be some scheduling issues we have talked about, but, I should learn not to say, hey, they're going to be on, and then someone doesn't show up. It is what it is. I'm happy about it. That's why I talk about it. So there's that. So before I spoil anything else, we're just going to go into Genesis 49 through 50 and in this great book, starting in verses 1 through 7. Then Jacob called his sons and said, "Gather yourselves together, that I may tell you what shall happen to you in days to come. Assemble and listen, O sons of Jacob. Listen to Israel, your father. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the firstfruits of my strength. Preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power. Unstable as water, you shall not have preeminence, because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence are their swords. Let my soul come not into their counsel. O my glory, be not joined to their company. For in their anger they killed men, and in their willfulness they hamstrung oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel." As he's approaching the end of his life, with one of his final acts, a much older, much more wiser Jacob is pronouncing blessings and prophecies on his sons in their own unique ways. Every son is going to get focused. Some get more than others because some tribes, as he's prophesying, as he's seeing the future, will have more importance in Israel's history than others. Now, I do want to say this is notable in that this scenario is the first direct and conscious prophecy made by a human being in the Bible that I can remember. I may be forgetting about something along the way. I mean, some people would even throw Enoch in there, if first, second, and probably not third and fourth Enoch are actually real. He would have been one of the first prophets in that area. But as far as what has been recorded for us, it appears to be Jacob, who is the first to pronounce this prophecy. Now, all prior prophecies that we've had earlier have been delivered through divine means, like dreams and direct talks with men. So God would talk to you, say, hey, this is going to happen. Or he gives Joseph dreams, or he has Pharaoh have dreams so that Joseph can interpret them. But it appears to be Jacob is the first one capable of doing this, at least from what has been recorded. So from Jacob's point of view, these blessings also serve as prophecies for how the tribes will endure and survive, with some more notable than others, like we've said. So as we go through this list, we start with the firstborn son, Reuben. And not all of these are in order. I think it's probably just whatever Jacob had on his mind, or whatever God told him to speak about first. But Reuben, he does start at the beginning. So for Reuben, Jacob does not completely disown him for his sinful actions to Jacob's wife, Bilhah, but he doesn't forget it either. Reuben committed a very grave offense against his father and against his mother-in-law by engaging in that sinful act, and as a result lost his right to be the firstborn, as we've covered before. And Jacob has forgiven his son, but he hasn't forgotten what was done. And there's a huge difference between the two, because Reuben needed to be better. And in Reuben that we've seen, there has been growth, but he's still not there to where he could have been the leader of his brothers after this point in time. So Reuben as a tribe would never be as significant as they normally would have deserved to be as the firstborn's descendants. But because of the actions of their forefather, they would be punished to remain in mediocrity, mostly due to their own incompetence and apostasy than directly because of Reuben's actions. There are twofold things happening here. They are cursed because of that, in a sense, as part of this. It's a blessing and a curse in some respects. But it maintains itself as a curse because of their own actions, not simply because Reuben did something, therefore they must be cursed for all eternity. We're not talking about original sin here. So throughout biblical history, as far as I can recall, there are no notable kings, prophets, or judges of the tribe of Reuben. And there's barely anyone heroic of note from the tribe. I think at most there's like some warriors who joined David from the tribe of Reuben that we see in either First and Second Samuel, or First and Second, or it was probably First Chronicles. So that's Reuben's legacy, and it started because of his actions, but ended up in the way that they did for the rest of the tribe because of their own actions or lack thereof. In many respects, Reuben wasn't always the most go-getter team, which we shall say. So then we have Simeon and Levi. Both of them are prophesied about together and judged about together because of their actions in Shechem. Now, while they had been in the right to be righteously angry at what had happened to their sister Dinah, their follow-through was once again evil and horrendous, which Jacob rightfully calls out and despises. As a result of their actions, the tribes of Simeon and Levi will lose their importance from a leadership standard. Simeon is going to later be absorbed into the tribe of Judah, and Levi will hold no land, and all of his descendants will be forced to be priests and servants to the other tribes. So as far as the other tribes are concerned, when we get there forever from now in Joshua and Judges, we're going to see that Levi, the tribe of Levi, their job is to be priests, so they intermingle with the other tribes, and their job looking after this people's spiritual welfare, which doesn't always happen. And we will see that multiple times over in the Bible. So we'll move on from there to verses 8 through 12. Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion, and as a lioness, who dares rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him. Some of your Bibles may say, until he comes to whom it belongs, or the Hebrew would be until Shiloh comes, or until he comes to Shiloh. We'll get to that in a moment. Continuing in the verse, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. Binding his foal to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine, he has washed his garments in wine and his vesture in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine and his teeth whiter than milk. As we've studied Judah's life, it has been made very apparent to us he is not a perfect man. There are things that you could argue he might have been able to lose his firstborn rights over this, but it didn't happen. And hey, even amongst the brothers, there was no such man who was perfect. Joseph wasn't perfect because they're human beings. But he was the next in line to succeed Jacob as the firstborn, now that his 3 older brothers had lost that right. He also had spent much time becoming a better man and one who had repented of his sins. Knowing this, both God and Jacob blessed him through these prophecies and blessings, and his descendants, which will eventually lead to the Messiah from his line. Judah as a tribe would become the most prominent, upturning Ephraim's reign, like we discussed in another episode, to be the one through whom most good kings would come from, and the ones who more often would believe and worship God. Once again, Judah's track record as a tribe is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But if you're holding them up on the board, the percentage-wise, seeing who's better than the others, Judah's probably going to be top dog. Now, this reference I talked about earlier, to until tribute comes to him, is a very curious translation of what other translations would render as until he comes to Shiloh or until Shiloh comes. A very cursory reading of Scripture would take this as a reference to the biblical city of Shiloh. But if you know your history, this isn't true because it does not exist in a state that it would later on in Moses' writing as he's writing this down. And this is the only time where Shiloh is not used as a descriptor of the city where the priests would lead the people from in the years to come. Every other reference that I looked up, and I could have missed something, and if I do, I apologize. Shiloh refers to that actual city. This is pointing to something else because Shiloh as a city does not exist. In truth, this is an early name for the Messiah, the one prophesied all the way in Genesis 3. As Shiloh means he to whom the ruler's staff belongs. So the reason why I think the ESV uses until tribute comes to him is like showing a ruler getting what he deserves, but I think it really messes up the whole prophecy part about leading to Jesus by doing so. Yeah, Jesus is going to get the tribute that comes to him, but you're miring that in these different words that don't make as much sense as the original intent. So, hey, Jesus is going to be this person who would come from Judah's line and whose reign will never end, as he alone is worthy to hold the ruler's staff, because the scepter will never depart from Judah. That does not mean that from here on out, Judah is a king and all of his descendants are king, or as soon as David gets up on the throne as a descendant of Judah, that means his line, as far as king-wise, there will always be a king in Judah and Israel. No, that's not what it's talking about. It's talking about the eternal king that will come from this, who has always been the king, even if we've never recognized that fact. And we'll move on from there to verses 13 through 21. Zebulun shall dwell at the shore of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his borders shall be at Sidon. Issachar is a strong donkey, crouching between the sheepfolds. He saw that a resting place was good, and that the land was pleasant, so he bowed his shoulder to bear, and became a servant at forced labor. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a viper by the path, that bites the horse's heel so that his rider falls backward. I wait for your salvation, O Lord. Raiders shall raid Gad, but he shall raid at their heels. And Gad kind of is close to the Hebrew word that means raiders and raiding, so it's kind of a pun there. Then we have Asher's food shall be rich, and he shall yield royal delicacies. Naphtali is a doe let loose that bears beautiful fawns. We go to Zebulun. Zebulun is another tribe of mediocrity from a historical perspective. Not to say that the people there were just somehow lesser, it's just they didn't really do too much of note. Now, curiously, Zebulun is not a tribe that borders the ocean, as suggested here, but it did eventually serve as intermediaries between the area around the Sea of Galilee and the region of Phoenicia, which Sidon refers to as a placeholder for the whole entire region. So Zebulun did have several trade routes that passed through their area, which tied them to the ships that relied on their protection of these routes to do business. Had Israel done what it was supposed to do, then that entire region would have been theirs, so their location would have been in that area. But because of their apostasy, the Phoenicians maintained control of what would have been Asher's and Zebulun's domain, at least part of it. Although there were times when both tribes had control of parts of these areas, there would be conquests and stuff like that, so there would be a time when Zebulun did have a time on the ocean, but for a very short time because of their apostasy. So that would fulfill part of the prophecy. Another way to fulfill that part of it would be to look at the Hebrew word lahoip, at L-E-H-O-L, it's going to be H-E, goodness gracious, L-E-H-O-W-P. How are you supposed to pronounce that in Hebrew? It's been so long since I've had my class, I'm not going to bother. So this word is used to describe both haven and shore in verse 13. So it comes from the root word chof, which can mean either word. So once again, Hebrew words have tons of different meanings. Very few times will you have just one singular meaning. So perhaps a better translation of this would be to describe both uses as a haven, rather than the first time being translated as shore, as Zebulun historically is a buffer between the Mediterranean and the Sea of Galilee. I'll leave that up to you. I could have gone right past that verse, but when I notice discrepancies like these, when other commentators have noticed discrepancies like these, that you find, oh, they're not actually discrepancies. I don't want to pass by it. I don't want to make you feel like, well, I didn't care about it, or I was wrestling with it. And it's like, well, I don't have an answer for it. No, I have an answer for it. And that's because I took the time to do the research. And I want you to do your own. Don't just trust me, do your own. So we'll move there to Issachar. Issachar is offered a kind of mixed prophecy, one where they are noted for having a good possession of the land, but would end up growing lazy and not working to their potential to the point where some of their number would be enslaved. And that would put them to actual work. Now, this works on the national level in that they have very large numbers to be put to work by the leaders of Israel. I can't remember where they placed in the tribes, but it was fairly significant as far as population. But they would also do this work in foreign lands where they would be enslaved by other nations. This easily happens after the Assyrians attack. It happens after the Aramaeans attack. It happens multiple times over, to where not just Israel, but specifically at this point, the tribe of Issachar would be singled out to be used as slaves. Then we get to Dan. Dan is going to be probably, outside of Ephraim, the most troublesome tribe in Israel. On the one hand, they will judge Israel. As one of the greatest judges, Samson comes from Dan. But on the other hand, they are also some of the first to commit themselves to sinning and apostasy to the point where they lead other tribes astray with their evil. This happens in the book of Judges with the idol worship that they encourage, and in the fact that when they split off in First Kings with the 10 northern tribes, there's going to be a golden calf idol installed in the city of Dan, by the way, in a region that they were never supposed to own because it was not affiliated with where they were supposed to take over. That would have been around Philistia, but they found it too hard because they weren't doing their jobs. They weren't worshiping God. So the Philistines beat them out to where they took out people who had nothing to do with them, renamed the city after themselves, and committed all sorts of evil up there. And their continued apostasy is notable in that they are not listed among the tribes where the 144,000 righteous Jews are mentioned in Revelation 7. But too many people leave it at that. And if they do, they're letting the Bible contradict itself, because they are not permanently cut off from God's presence simply because they're not listed among the righteous tribes in Revelation. Instead, and I've made this mistake myself, so this is me calling me out. We see in Ezekiel 48 that they are going to be restored to God one day. Ezekiel 48 and parts of the prophecies at the end of Ezekiel are talking about the restoration of Israel after the end of days. And Dan is included amongst their number. So for all their evil and sin, for the righteous few who remain, God is looking after them. Then we get to Gad. Gad would serve David as one of his sources of fine soldiers, but later on would suffer due to breaking off from the rightful kings of Judah and be attacked multiple times by raiders from multiple locations, although they would ultimately succeed for a time until the Assyrians come in and take everything away and force them into a different land. Now Asher will settle in prosperous land and provide much food to the land of Israel in its fertile fields. Naphtali will flourish and be like a doe, living in the wilds of the land, yet also having a history of beautiful discourse, whether through songs or poetry. Now, some commentators also see this as a call forward to Jesus' ministry, as he worked in the lands of Naphtali for some of his ministry, that around that portion of the Sea of Galilee. There's plenty of cities that would have been historically in the land of Naphtali. I see where they're coming from. I don't know if I'd exactly take a bullet for that idea, but I did want to mention it as something else other people have thought about that I never would have thought about without them. And we'll go from there to verses 22 through 27. Joseph is a fruitful bow by a spring. His branches run over the wall. The archers bitterly attacked him, shot at him, and harassed him severely. Yet his bow remained unmoved. His arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. By the God of your father who will help you, by the Almighty who will bless you with blessings of heaven above. Blessings of the deep that crouches beneath, blessings of the breast and of the womb. The blessings of your father are mighty beyond the blessings of my parents, up to the bounties of the everlasting hills. May they be on the head of Joseph and on the brow of him who was set apart from his brothers. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf, in the morning devouring the prey, and at evening dividing the spoil. Joseph, through his sons Ephraim and Manasseh, will be immensely fruitful and strong. Ephraim will become one of the most important tribes of Israel. Although this will not always be a good thing. There will be hardship, but God will deliver them even from themselves. And we end with Benjamin there, the last child. Benjamin will end up, for its size, a very mighty tribe, though, like I said, small in number and land. We get the judge Ehud, or Ehud, however the heck you want to pronounce it, from the tribe of Benjamin. We have King Saul as the first king of Israel coming from Benjamin. Then we have Paul, also called Saul, who will lead many to Christ with a grand fervor. Some would even say a militaristic fervor. But there will also be terrible times for them, where their military competency will cause problems, such as the Israeli Civil War in Judges 20 through 21, where many good people are lost because they're so good at their job, because everyone else is supporting evil, because a lot of very evil things are happening around there. We'll get there when we get there. And we'll finish off chapter 49 with verses 28 through 33. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel. This is what their father said to them, as he blessed them, blessing each with a blessing suitable to him. Then he commanded them and said to them, I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field at Machpelah, to the east of Mamre in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field from Ephron the Hittite to possess as a burying place. There they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife, and there I buried Leah. The field and the cave that is in it were bought from the Hittites. When Jacob finished commanding his sons, he drew up his feet into the bed and breathed his last and was gathered to his people. And with this, Jacob makes his sons promise once more to bury him in the land of Canaan, where their true inheritance will be on God's timing. He had no idea how long Israel would remain in Egypt, but he wanted to use his last moments to remind them of what God was going to do with them. And with that, he dies. His legacy far better than he ever could have imagined. He had grown immensely from the deceitful brother and son that we saw earlier to the sometimes worshiper of God who sometimes got it right, but mostly only thought of himself and Rachel's legacy. Also, he could end up becoming the man who led his family into Egypt and blessed them with the final moments of his life. There's plenty of things we can learn from Jacob's life, but perhaps the most important of all is how he did return to God's service and repented of his many sins. It's never too late. And we'll go from there to Genesis 50, verses 1 through 14. Then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. 40 days were required for it, and that is how many are required for embalming. And the Egyptians wept for him 70 days. And when the days of weeping for him were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, If now I have found favor in your eyes, please speak in the ears of Pharaoh, saying, My father made me swear, saying, I am about to die. In my tomb that I hewed out for myself in the land of Canaan, there shall you bury me. Now therefore let me please go up and bury my father, then I will return. And Pharaoh answered, Go up and bury your father as he made you swear. So Joseph went up to bury his father. With him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his household, and all the elders of the land of Egypt, as well as all the household of Joseph, his brothers, and his father's household. Only their children, their flocks, and their herds were left in the land of Goshen. And there went up with him both chariots and horsemen. It was a very great company. When they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, they lamented there with a very great and grievous lamentation. And he made a mourning for his father 7 days. When the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning on the threshing floor of Atad, they said, This is a grievous mourning by the Egyptians. Therefore the place was named Abel Mizraim, which comes from the Hebrew word Mitzrayim, which is Egypt. It is beyond the Jordan. Thus his sons did for him as he had commanded them. For his sons carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field at Machpelah to the east of Mamre, which Abraham bought with the field from Ephron the Hittite to possess as a burying place. After he had buried his father, Joseph returned to Egypt with his brothers and all who had gone up with him to bury his father. A couple of things here. Unlike his Egyptian fellows that he spent many years among, Joseph refuses and does not want his father to be mummified. This is an Egyptian practice. It was very big religious significance to them. In their view of the afterlife, those who could afford this process or were able to be left with their goods, their wealth, their riches, and sometimes their servants who sometimes, not all the times, were killed around them so that they could serve them in the afterlife. But Joseph didn't want this for his father. Joseph knew where his father was going to be, and it certainly wasn't going to be in some fake, pathetic attempt at the afterlife like the Egyptian underworld. Jacob was going to be in glory with God. However long that took, depending on how you feel about Sheol, he was going to be in glory with God one day. So instead, he wishes for Jacob to be embalmed so that he will not decay en route to Canaan. Thus, he utilizes physicians rather than priests so that this can happen, as the priests were more qualified to mummify their dead patients, and this prevented Jacob's body from being associated with their heretical religion. I'm sure there were plenty of compromises he had to make along the way. This was not going to be one of them. Now, another thing here is it is very notable that Jacob, this foreigner, this guy who just came from a distant land, a neighboring country, but it's still a distant land, who was most definitely not Egyptian at all, is being mourned by the Egyptian people for 70 days, which is especially notable outside of the fact that it's 70 days, and it's quite a long time to mourn back to back to back. But 72 days in Egyptian culture were required for them to mourn a pharaoh or another royal's death, showing just how important Jacob had become to them. And I think that's one of the things Moses does want to focus on in writing this. It's like, hey, things used to be good between Egypt and us. We used to be friendly with one another. Where this other pharaoh who didn't know Jacob, who didn't know Joseph, if he never rose up to power, we could have been friends to this day. But that didn't happen. And we'll discuss that pharaoh later on when we get into Exodus. But I think this is an editorial decision, being God breathed through Moses, of saying, look, we weren't always enemies. They even mourned our father, our mutual father Jacob, and look at where we ended up. So also notice what Joseph does and does not do in this scenario. He does not simply just go off on his own and decide to do this. Instead, even though he does not, from a moral perspective, require Pharaoh's blessing to do the right thing, he still humbly submits himself to a human authority figure in order to do it. Just because you and I, that we work for God, it does not mean we ignore the practices and courtesies of our time and cultures. It would have been very easy for Pharaoh to have seen Joseph as insubordinate if he didn't ask for permission to do this. We need to learn from his example and do the same to those who have authority over us. I don't just go up to my boss and say, hey, I'm going to be on a mission trip for a year over here in Indonesia or the Congo or Belize or what have you. By the way, my job's still going to be back when I come back, right? Did you talk to him about that? Because he's losing you for a year, or he's losing you for a week or a month or how long? Or scenarios being like, well, that money was just there. I just spent it on charity, that's for the good work of the Lord. Well, that wasn't your money to spend. Think about what you're about to do before you do it. Recognize, hey, our secular bosses, people of authority over us, they need to be respected too. Just because they don't know who Jesus is in the same way that you and I do does not make them inferior on this world. They still need respect. They, for the most part, have earned that respect. There are plenty of people out there who haven't earned respect, but we still need to be respectful to them. So don't just do something simply because it's the right thing. It's like, hey, it's a good thing to go on a mission trip. It's a good thing to evangelize to other people. It's not a good idea to do that at the cost of making yourself look evil in the sight of other people. Be rational about it. Think about it. Think it through. Don't just do it because it's the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do for Joseph to bury his father in Canaan. It was not the right thing to do for him to just do it without asking permission first, especially to someone like Pharaoh, who could have easily just said, well, it's time to go kill that sucker and be done with them for even a smallest slight. No matter what Joseph had done beforehand, you don't show disrespect that way to someone like him. And with that, we'll go to verses 15 through 26, and we will finish off the entire book of Genesis, chapter by chapter, verse by verse. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "It may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him." So they send a message to Joseph saying, "Your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, 'Please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin because they did evil to you. And now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father.'" Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also came and fell down before him and said, "Behold, we are your servants." But Joseph said to them, "Do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear, I will provide for you and your little ones." Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. So Joseph remained in Egypt and his father's house. Joseph lived 110 years, and Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the third generation. The children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were counted as Joseph's own. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, "God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here." So Joseph died, being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. Let's start with the first part. The brothers, following their father's death, fear Joseph's potential reprisal against them. It's a natural fear. But recall that they had been with him for several years at this point, past their earlier betrayal, and that he had treated them far fairer and better than they ever deserved from his hand. Yet, even with Jacob's death, they should have known better. They shouldn't have thought that Joseph had just been waiting for Jacob to die so that he could punish them. But their confession of their sins and their submission to him does show that, even though their fears are misplaced, they are true in their convictions to have changed as they have. It's a mixed bag. Imagine that, people being a mixed bag. But it's okay. It ends up well. They're fools to do and act like they do, but at that same time, they are right to say that they have repented, because they have. They have made great strides from the people and the men who sold their brother into slavery in Egypt or wanted to have him murdered, to these people who are bowing before him as was prophesied way before. And it's in this moment that we get the thesis statement of Joseph's life. You probably heard it before, but we're going to say it again. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. Now, it doesn't always feel like that. It doesn't always seem like that. But nothing in this world happens without God either being behind it or allowing it to occur for his own purposes. That means everything, even the things we don't like, especially the things we don't like. Every single thing that happens in this world that seems senseless, a waste of life, or that allows sin to remain ultimately serves a purpose. Whether we are privy to what that purpose is becomes an entirely different matter, though. That's not what I'm talking about. I would love to see all the lines and see how they connect and go, okay, that's why it had to happen that way. But guess what? I'm not him. I just work for him. Sometimes not well, sometimes okay, sometimes even good. And whatever he chooses to reveal to me, I will take. As much as I hate saying that out loud, because I want to know everything. But the simple fact of the matter is, I am not God. You are not God. We as people are not God. Yet, we seek to understand things as he does, sometimes to our own detriment. Now, real quick, there is nothing wrong with asking questions or not knowing why things happen the way that they do, but there is plenty wrong with allowing those circumstances to make us angry at God for events we do not like that happen in our lives and the lives of others. Asking questions is a natural human response. You know why? Because we don't understand and we want to seek understanding. Not getting the answers that we want or not getting an answer at all is no excuse to get angry at God, because he can tell us whatever he wants. He doesn't have to say anything. We are very blessed that he chooses to speak to us at all. And there have been some times when he's been completely and utterly silent to me. There's been other times he's used people in my life to help me understand it. And there's been other times, very rare, where I've heard his voice. And then I understood why things had to happen the way they did. That's up to him. He did not have to speak to me, yet he did it out of love. He does not have to speak to you, And his silence is just as loving as his words because you're still his, because he still loves you. And look, I'm not saying that to make excuses on his behalf. I'm saying it because it's true. I will never be happy that things like murder, sexual assault, genocide, betrayals, and human trafficking, and plenty of other things out there exist in the world. And guess what? I don't have to like that, and I shouldn't like that. But I do need to make peace with the idea that we live in a world that is consumed by sin. And it is only by the grace of God that we aren't struck down and killed the first time we commit a sin. I've probably said it 1,000 times before. I'm going to say it 1,000 times more until you get it. God is so merciful and gracious to us that he allows these bad things to happen, because if he punished every single evil sin, none of us would make it past infancy. None of us. But because he is loving, because he is merciful and kind, because he gives us opportunities to repent, evil exists in this world. And yet that evil will never overcome him. No matter what evil does, no matter what sin does, it can never stop the plans of God, because he's the one who allows it to remain. And one day, he's going to reach a breaking point, and there will be a time when there will be no more sin, no more evil, no more sickness, no more pain, no more of that crap. Only the good things of him will we know who are his. Again and again, I'll say it again and again, God is patient and loving, even to those who will never love him back. So he allows evil to remain in this world to give those people time to repent, even though he knows not all will do so. And in fact, historically speaking, not all have done so. I would hazard a guess that the vast majority of human beings who have existed on this planet have not accepted him as their savior, have not come to him in repentance and said, I am a sinner. I am worthless. I need you to make me whole. You are the only way. Nothing I can do on my own is ever going to make me right. And I know some people get really down when you hear the statistics on stuff like that. I don't have the actual numbers, but I can all but guarantee the actual people who've said yes and have submitted to his authority are far fewer in number than those who said no and rejected him to his face, even at the end of their lives. But it is far better for us that he allows us the chance to say yes or no to him, rather than doing the righteous thing and wiping us out. Because there is no one who is free from sin in this world, and we are all guilty of defying him and harming his creations. Yet that same God who is judge, wrath, and executioner is the same God who provides, comforts, and loves as he offers life. Joseph rightfully says that he is not God here in these verses, and he cannot act in his place, because he understands that God alone has the right to enact, postpone, or remit the sentence for his justice. Thus, Joseph forgives his brothers once more and commits to providing for them, just as God provides for us despite our many sins against him. And as we get to the end of his life, after living 110 years, Joseph too dies, asking his descendants to bury him likewise in Canaan, also knowing that Egypt was not his inheritance. This was not done after his death initially. This was done later on when the Israelites do leave Egypt. So there's a huge gap of history here, but it was done. His death is the final statement on a definitive history of the Israelites in Egypt for some 400 years, as Moses' audience would have understood more about their current situations and past, so we didn't need to elaborate on them, which is why we don't have a book in between Genesis and Exodus explaining this 400 some years. So they knew that, but they needed to know their history. They needed to know where they came from. They needed to know the struggles of the men and women of God who came before them, who have brought them to this place that they are now outside of Egypt. They're outside of bondage, and they're on their way to the promised land. How did we get here? Was it about explaining precisely how the world was made, how many years it took, every nook and cranny of the exploration of, well, was it over billions of years? Was it over 100,000 years? Was it over 10,000 years or 6,000 years? No, that wasn't the point. There's an answer, but it's not the point of what we're talking about here. The point was to get them to understand from the beginning up until now and after this point and for always, they are God's chosen people. And this is a story of how they came to be. And with that, we are done with the book of Genesis. So, guys, thank you for heading in this journey with me. Next week, we will be in the book of Exodus, like I said, chapters 1 and 2. I'm looking forward to it. We've got a lot to discuss there. It's going to be a really fun time. Exodus is I mean, you start with the first part of the book. That's what most people know, but there's plenty after that that needs to be explored. Even the parts where we start describing things, and you know how much I love describing things. There's plenty to be gleaned from those parts where I start like losing my focus. There's plenty of why God put that in there, why it is still God breathed scripture. So please get a chance, leave a 5-star review on your podcasting platform of choice. It'll help us with the ratings there, help us get more people engaged. I have noticed a slight engagement for this podcast, once again, from overseas and even in America more. So I'm really happy with that. I'm really glad that more people are tuning in. So if you're interested in that, just keep spreading the show around. If you're interested in my own fiction writing, you can find my works at starvingwritersguild.com or on Amazon by searching for the name MC Ashley. If you're interested in some further solid studies into the Bible and its teachings, then check out the other members of the Anasal Ministries podcasting network. You can contact me at letnothingmove@gmail.com. I'd like to extend a special thank you to Joshua Knoll for the editing that he does and for the music he has to the podcast. Oh, and one last thing, a bit of an announcement. Because I don't do enough in this world. I did not record 6 videos podcasts this week or YouTube videos. No, I didn't do any of that. So I need to add one more thing to my plate because I'm a glutton for punishment. I'm starting a new podcast. It's called Why I Don't Like. Uh, just kind of came about as a result of watching one show. I wish there was somewhere I could just speak my feelings into the world. And I realized, oh, well, I have the perfect opportunity to do that. So it's not going to be a bashing show, as in like, there's nothing of value in these things that I watched. It's going to be like, here's the things I focus on that I really enjoy, that I wish they would have fleshed out more. Here's the things that I despise, that I wish I'd never seen the light of day. So it's not going to be like, if you like this, you're trash, and I don't want to hear you. It's just me just speaking my own opinions about the things that I wish could have been better. Because if I'm having such strong feelings about it, it means either it was just that offensive to me, or I saw what could have been and it didn't happen, and I see what needs to be fixed, and I see like all these good stuff over here, yet you ruin it with that. So that's the purpose of why I don't like. I'll be doing anime, I'll be doing comics, I'll be doing video games and TV and movies. I've got things lined up. I'm going to be starting with, God help me, Mushoku Tensei, the progenitor of a lot of modern isekai that I have many, many problems with because the world building is so good, and yet we end up with Rudius as the main character. So there's that. This is a little sneak preview. I'm hoping to start next week, so that should drop on Friday, the Friday of the week that you would have gotten this episode. It'll start off on Systematic Ecology on a YouTube page, and it'll go separately, audio version only, on the podcast, which is Why I Don't Like. So check that out. Hopefully you'll be able to subscribe to it. I really appreciate everything you guys do. And with all that in mind, God bless you all in accordance to his will and not mine. And allow me one more time to remind you, let nothing move you.
Hey guys, are you interested in podcasting but don't know where to go? Well, check out Zencaster.com and go ahead and make an account there and use special promo code Let Nothing Move You, all caps. That way you can get 30% off of your next deal to go ahead and set things up so you can figure out how to edit stuff using Zencaster.com to host your stuff, to get things done there. So check out Zencaster.com, use special promo code Let Nothing Move You. All right, see ya.